When it comes to using data, many are relying on gut instinct, but that kind of decision-making is flawed. What they really need is certainty. It's the feeling when everything clicks. That's why Qlik is disrupting the industry with our active intelligence platform to help you transform data into informed action in the business moment.
Welcome, my name is Mark Fedeli.
Did we go? Yeah, let's go.
Welcome again.
I have to introduce
Oh,
you.
thank you. I'm so used to being the only one.
And also provide some housekeeping details.
Please do.
Okay. Hello everyone, I would like to welcome both our in-person audience and virtual audience to track 4, translating data into actionable insights. I'm Lakshmi Randall from Informatica. I'm a co-track producer and moderator for this session. Our session this hour is mining relationships with innovation systems. Before I introduce the speaker, a few housekeeping details. This session is being recorded and it will be made available as part of your registration. Our live audience, please raise your hand if you have any questions at the end of the session. Our virtual audience, please submit your questions via Hua app Q&A tab. Executives who are responsible for network defense speak a different language than cyber analysts. So how do we create a common framework so they can make both strategic and tactical decisions to address the threats? So this session will provide insights on how to link and connect systems to bring the data together to help both of these personas make informed decisions. Our speaker is Mark Fedeli. Mark is a Federal Alliance Director at Qlik. Mark is passionate about 3 things: data literacy, alliances, and business use cases.
Very good.
Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Appreciate everyone here, live and virtual. Again, my name is Mark Fedeli, and one of my responsibilities is taking Qlik's active intelligence sort of rollout, which is combining historical and real-time data into federal use cases. So in our federal world, US government agencies, of course, care about security. They also care about research. And when you combine those, research, security, you have an intersection of many types of data and many types of questions that it takes not only enterprise data, but publicly available data to kind of get at some of the challenges related to research security, which could be cyber related, could be data manipulation, could just be mistakes in how data projects are executed. There's a lot of ways that projects can go wrong or can be exposed to bad actors. And so to bring that data together is kind of a whole of government initiative that's ratcheting up right now across the federal space. And what I want to talk about today is how do you do the work of research security without harming research? And then how do you do research without harming national security? Not easy. So before we get started, I have really 2 poll questions, a very informal poll question, and then the more formal one that was submitted on the great Hoover app, which I really like. Anyone, show of hands, this is an informal poll. What's the difference between a used car salesman and a software salesman? If you've heard this joke before, let me know. I see some folks laughing. Used car salesmen know that they're lying. Well, what I mean is, of course, everyone loves their own software product. It solves certain things. But this topic of innovation systems is one that no one product can solve. It's really a systemic challenge. And that's what's exciting about being in the solution space where I am, is that bringing together partners, other technology capabilities, solution providers, and now the hyperscalers, right? The big cloud providers. There's new things that you can do in the area of research security so that research can move forward and not harm national security in the same ways that it has in the past, where you have many more siloed systems. So let's get into it. So this is one of the rare consensus items in Washington. And I know for those of you who don't live in Washington, D.C., where I live, is there such a thing as consensus in Washington? Well, of course there is, about a few topics, one of which is protecting research innovations. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about what's called problematic researchers. The FBI Director, Christopher Wray, recently came out saying problematic researchers are a challenge, and we'll talk about problematic researchers, why that's a unique threat, but it's also an opportunity for innovation systems to pivot into a new way of thinking about research security. There are still, no matter how much you sell the good idea that you can bring data together, you still have cultures in conflict. Security wants to shut out all risk. Research wants to open things up for collaboration. Those are two different cultures, and they're not going to all of a sudden overlap and perfectly synchronize. So it's a risk conversation. It's not strictly a compliance conversation, and it's not binary. Every organization that does research has to think about this and wrestle with these challenges on their own. And that's why, as Lakshmi said, there's a strategic big picture approach to this, resource allocation, prioritization, and then there's sort of the deep dive, like, okay, what part of my research portfolio is exposed? And that's the kind of questions that what we call system relationship analytics, for lack of a better name, and that's sort of an internal name. There's a reason it's not really on the slides, because we're just talking about what can be done with data about systems. And so that's how you combine deep dives and the big picture analysis in analysis of systems. And ultimately, let's head to the punchline, innovation systems can self-govern, self-manage when they get this data about themselves organized and in the right hands. So we will talk about a case study, Charles Lieber, to add some urgency to our conversation and add some specifics, and then we'll finish on recommendations and, of course, Q&A. So what's the rare consensus? Authoritarian governments smell blood in the water, right? So that quote attributed to Chuck Schumer about foreign entities that want to own innovations in the US came just before some significant legislation was passed that maybe folks were overlooking. The national defense budget, research and industrial security initiatives, and a host of others had new initiatives that now roll into the National Security Program Memorandum 33 requirements. And if you're working research security, this document is sort of going around, getting traction, and folks are paying attention to what data can be used to provide research security insights. So why does this matter? Research security is a fundamental part of the national security innovation ecosystem. And in this somewhat busy slide, the two things you want to see is who owns the risk and how big it is on the left, and on the right, the famous barbell, right? The barbell indicates on the left, all this sort of readiness and current investments in capabilities sort of post-Soviet era. To some degree, it's sort of the Cold War and then the follow-on wars in the Middle East. And on the far right, the future wars, now we're talking about high-end autonomous conflict. So when the acquisition community is pushing forward, cost, schedule, performance is what they care about. That's what they live and breathe every day. And risk of sort of lost technology advantage isn't always on their radar. They have programs, just like any other sort of operational component or line of business operator. You have deliverables, KPIs that push you forward every day. And so it's very hard to map today's technologies, the things you're putting dollars into research for, AI and autonomy and hypersonics and quantum, and how do you map those into your current programs? That's a very hard thing to do. And it's so hard that it creates this barbell effect, where you're sustaining a certain amount of investment in prior or legacy technologies in national security, and then you have the new ideas that are still not at the tech readiness level to be deployed. So what do you do in the middle there? Well, who owns the risk are the DoD programs and the large primes. And that's a defined community of folks who have lots of data about the innovation systems in the sort of ready and in the future states. And so this is the community that has to ingest data and share that. And of course, from a national security standpoint, the big theme is integrated deterrence. So you want to be capable enough so that wars don't happen, right? That's the logic behind all of this. And it ends up working its way out in popular messaging about supply chain risk, about cybersecurity, about post-pandemic or even in the pandemic sort of financial activities that were in the news. Many companies that went under were sort of funded by foreign entities trying to access their technology. So that's like a real challenge because that's in the open market. You can't prevent that. So what do? So bringing that data together and looking at innovation as a system is this idea of system relationship analytics. And Qlik's unique analytic engine that associates data that's real-time and that's historic enables the community to get after this problem in net new ways. And that includes what our big launch is Qlik Cloud Government. That's the capability that's going through the FedRAMP process and is in process now for taking publicly available data or whatever data in the cloud and then leveraging cloud capabilities for analysis and analytics. So why? Well, there are many areas of technology, many more than a policymaker and congressional staffs can keep up with, that are really complex. In just the last 2 years, a state-sponsored hack through SolarWinds, well-known. FireEye sort of detected that somewhat early in its life cycle, so you have a cyber event. Next, Charles Lieber convicted for foreign talent recruitment. So he was recruited by foreign talent programs and had a conviction in December 2021 for sharing research and then setting up foreign research operations without telling the US government, who was funding him for his US-based research. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine produces a series of additional new attacks, hacks, and then a quantum computing initiative proclaims that before, in the not too distant future, before let's say 3 to 7 years, much of current digital cryptography, in other words encryption, in other words all the stuff that protects our information, will be broken, will be obsolete. Now, quantum can of course fix that. There's many resolutions for all of these. The challenge in the federal government and all areas of security, research security included, is how do you get left of the boom, right? How do you avoid a quantum breakthrough that disrupts your technology protection scheme, your encryption, your internal security capabilities, and your data? So security leaders who are confronting, current programs and then thinking about future technologies have a hard time keeping track. And this is only like 4 elements of sort of the complex research challenges that we face. They want to ask, well, what connects the dots between these events? What's our risk exposure? What do we do to sort of prioritize this cyber data and research data and investigative data? What do we need to go get from external sources for due diligence? Where do we invest? Are our supply chains secure? So many questions follow sort of this high-end national security, I would say, confrontation about technology. So what do? Well, our argument is look at the problem related to what's called problematic researchers for guidance of what to do. So this was a prototype that we did a rapid test, that's the wrong word, right? We quickly deployed a version of Qlik in the cloud to prove that you could associate a Google Scholar set of names and entities that are sort of authors of papers with US Navy funded, publicly announced SBIR grant recipients. So this list of grant recipients is part of the Small Business Innovation Research Program. It's been around for about 25 years. Tens of thousands of researchers, principal investigators named in that list, publicly available. So correlated that with Google Scholar APIs, which just says, who are the authors and co-author relationships that exist between the people that are 1 degree of separation from those principal investigators. And the US government had published a list of foreign talent programs, universities, and affiliates that are known to be involved with extracting research information, similar to the Charles Lieber case, which we'll describe. So 3 lists, all publicly available. Can we identify names of individuals who have been receiving funding, who are at risk of being pursued by those foreign talent programs? And indeed we did. We found that by using Google Scholar, all publicly available data. So this is something you could do on your own. So that's all publicly available data for the government. For each organization that invests in research, you can do the same process. So how does that work? Well, again, we'll look at the problematic researchers as our template. So Charles Lieber is this high visibility case. sort of the known bad event. Now you're trying to monitor and map to, are there other events like that that are sort of brewing and unfolding? So start with authoritative, again, public documents. That Senate inquiry in 2019, that listed the 1,000 Talent Program, participating universities. Navy open source and analysis technology report, again, public distribution in cognitive computing. Who were the researchers involved there? The Executive Order 14017 from June 21, and then the Charles Lieber investigation and the names that were associated with that. That's all able to be ingested and then correlated with publicly available data that's easily accessible. And then you can start to look at what areas of technology that the US cares about are being exposed to these types of foreign interventions. The same thing can be done with all the same data sources and an enterprise's own R&D research holdings, information, metadata, and specific data about its own investments. So when we conduct analysis, what do we want to, like, what are the techniques? Well, simple investigation, you're looking at first, on the left, what you see are a set of institutional links between US-funded researchers. So the key is, legally, if the US government provides funding to an organization, then it has the ability to track and say, as a condition of you receiving funding, you can't also not disclose foreign investment and foreign involvement. That's crucial. It's not saying that you can't also take foreign investment. You can. That's legal. What you can't do is what Charles Lieber did, is take it and not disclose it. So that's what allows you, so if all the disclosures are there, this is back to my initial poll question, right? Which, well, actually I didn't discuss it yet, so this is a good point to inject it. Well, not the one about the salesman. The second poll question. The second poll question, whether an open research or a strictly controlled research community is better. So I framed the question this way, and I'll read it. Which is more important today, strict research security or open institutional collaboration? So open institutional collaboration means many lines of effort between foreign talent programs that are intentionally attempting to sort of extract design information and data and algorithms, or do we want to strictly control and separate? Does anybody want to guess what the audience said that responded? There were like 15 or 14 respondents, which is great because that allowed it to be 50-50, which it was. 0 votes for control. But that's because I cheated. I said, here's your 3 options. Strict research security control, open collaboration, or 3, wait, why can't I have both? Well, the point is you can't have, so I set, but interestingly, 7 votes for open collaboration, 7 votes, equal number, for both. So nobody wants strict research control. That defies the nature of science and research and this great hallowed community that we're in. There's a global community of people that are doing research and science for science's sake. However, not everyone is playing by the rules. And so the US and any corporation that invests has a right to draw some boxes around both, right? What its own strict security measures are going to be for certain types of information that it's, or certain types of research breakthroughs that it's investing in. It's called intellectual property. Every business needs that. The capitalist system depends on that. And then you still need to open things up and ask fundamental questions about even your most sacred capabilities. And that's what makes our economic system exciting. And that's probably the biggest contribution to sort of overall human welfare from a systems perspective. Now, I'm not saying, making a blanket statement that capitalism is great and free markets are great. I'm just saying that the data says this unlocks human performance, human potential, human growth. And so, yes, of course we have to have open. That's sort of the opinionated statement that I'll make, but I think it's founded in data. And yet, the balance is, foreign talent programs are trying to do R&D by being really good at pulling information and insights over rather than doing the fundamental research. So that's what you want to deter. And my recommendation as part of national policy is if we're going to do integrated deterrence, you want to deter folks sort of going about it the wrong way and instead investing in their own research capabilities, which exist. So for those of you who do investigative work, or anybody on this, on the virtual side who's looking at this is like an eye chart, right? But to drill down into the weeds, to do the deep dive, you're looking at individual connections, people, the data they have, the communications they have. Do we really want to have researchers be subjected to this? We really don't. But as long as researchers are contributing to foreign talent program and sharing their information and allowing themselves to be recruited, they're inviting a whole security regime to follow the money and figure out who's doing what. And that is now available on a large scale using publicly available data. LexisNexis has data, Exeger has data. Fundamental products that are fantastic at gathering publicly available data can be correlated and are being correlated against enterprise holdings to provide that research view into those individual researchers that might be at risk. So if you're going to do a deep dive like this, you want to be careful because that also jeopardizes the ability to get researchers to do research and feel that collaborative spirit that's so crucial. It's a big challenge. So what did we learn when we looked at Charles Lieber when he was investigated and convicted? We learned that he did research on human cell performance among his many areas of expertise. Right down Massachusetts Avenue at the other end, he was working on an Air Force-funded project for cell performance that eventually became leaked to Chinese students, postdocs, and investors. And that's why he was convicted, because he did research in China that he didn't tell his US funders about, and the FBI convicted him. However, after that, you can track what happened next. Some of his researchers went on to develop indigenous research lines that pivoted from human cell performance and created what was called a microscale wireless mesh nano system. Don't ask me what that is, but it's published. So as you can imagine, research takes on a life of its own as investment evolves. And in this case, what we identified is just looking at some market research, and this is really detailed on the bottom right, this is a highly sort of granular investigative tool for looking at how some of this information flows through consortia, research consortia, that play on both sides of the fence, so to speak, that interact with Chinese researchers and US researchers. In other words, it's very easy for research to flow to and from foreign sources and US sources through consortia, through events like this. There's always going to be open collaboration. That's just fundamental to the nature of research, and it should be so. But now you're inviting investigators to look closely and to put the clamps on research if you don't take a risk-based approach to your research. And so what's the forecast? IP ownership will drive talent and technology investments and market capture. In other words, capital is going to move to wherever intellectual property is being developed, and talent and technology investments will flow there. That's a strategic part of that comment of they want to own the innovations at the top of the brief. So what do we do? These are my final recommendations, and then we'll have discussion. These are initial recommendations. More than anything else, this is a systems-based challenge. There's no one person that's going to come up with the right ideas, but obviously invest in due diligence. Understand what research you're doing and allocate, 1 or 2% of your research investment into due diligence fund just to make sure that you're protecting your investment and understanding where the collaboration is going so that you can increase confidence in your R&D investment, right? The more due diligence you do, the more you know where to put your R&D investment. It's a great idea, right? It seems obvious. I'd say due diligence gets short shrift often. Next is quantify risks. So all the vendors who provide data that data can be correlated, but you need supply chain data, you need sort of that due diligence on your researchers. Even things like quantum computing, like where are the breakthroughs coming? You could start to do some technology forecasting and use that to quantify the risk. So by date X, we anticipate this quantum breakthrough is going to alleviate these of our encrypted data holdings. Therefore, we should allocate resources into quantum capabilities to protect those holdings, or else risk losing that innovation. Next, integrate your event data. This is the Qlik commercial, and not everyone, this isn't just for Qlik, this is for anyone who can do this. If you could integrate your event data, your cyber streams, SIM tools, those risk scores have outputs from real time, really correlate that with your risk model against your network traffic, you can see why somebody might be looking at a particular set of data or why they might be pursuing that, because that's where your crown jewels are. This is just another part of the cyber community doing what it does so well. You want to illuminate supply chains as well, including like your intellectual property supply chains, all the way back to the researcher with the great idea. When they first had that idea, were they talking about it everywhere? If that's part of your intellectual property, and they were already talking about it on social media, that might not be where to invest. Or create a derivative and protect that. Next, and finally, prioritize agility. This is moment in time. You can build a spreadsheet. This is a fictitious data example of a dashboard that we've built in Qlik for a customer that's looking at a number of risks, and then there's an alerting system behind this tied to publicly available data to say this happened, this happened, this happened. Each time an event happens that matters, the key is think big and think small at the tactical level, do that due diligence and bring that together, have the right stakeholders together so that you can be agile, because we're in the early innings of this challenge. Thank you. And we have a few minutes for questions. Lakshmi, do you want to take that over?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So Mark, thanks for the presentation. Super interesting. Question on how scalable it is to bring the data together, understand that the use case from DoD, but there's a lot of other agencies that do a bunch of research, right? Across,
Absolutely.
Healthcare, biotech,
That's right.
National labs. How scalable is it? What's the challenges of kind of getting to that scale? Because the next, I think the next conflict will be, in the cyberspace will be information kind of conflict. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
That's a very astute question. So I bias towards DoD because I know that the DoD has invested in the Advancing Analytics program called Advana, and then the Chief Data and AI Office. So DepSecDef Cat Hicks is on the stump repeatedly about this issue and is moving down this path because they understand the challenge from the security side of research security. But there are initiatives where you can do a lightweight version of Advana. And for everyone who doesn't know, Advana has HR data and contracts data. It's traditional business data. And it's available for many, many use cases to run analytics. So Qlik is part of that. So I happen to know like how that data can come together. You don't need to do all of the use cases that Advana supports to do this. You just need access to those systems that I mentioned, sort of your investment systems, stuff about your principal investigators. You need to do enough due diligence. More than anything, I think the key for institutions that don't want to slow science is to pre-screen and just create some new conditions for new principal investigators, that they go through some version of a background, something like a background, or if they would agree to submit to due diligence. Each agency has to establish their risk, and each organization needs to establish its risk tolerance before sort of signing up to impose that, because that can be a damper on research. But that's, I think, what they have to do is get enough of that data together so they can actually do the due diligence and follow up on whatever conditions they put on their researchers, and that's more than enough. You don't need to tie all the data together. DoD has many other reasons to do that, and Advana is a great platform as a model, but for those who aren't willing to do that, I think early research, due diligence, and sort of putting the criteria to the researcher is key. And that was what happened with the Charles Lieber case too. He had those requirements, and therefore that data could be gathered and didn't violate privacy, and it didn't violate expectations. Great question.
One of the major inhibitors for data-driven decision is lack of trust in data.
Yeah.
With all those public data sources, and how do you ensure the validity of the data, and it's relevant for those risk analysis that need to be done? And is there a human element to it?
Absolutely. So the title that I think you helped come up with, Mining Relationships with Innovation Systems, that's full circle. So if you want to mine relationships within innovation systems, that's sort of the security model, this investigative model, big picture drill down. If you want to do it with the innovation system, which is what I advocate for ultimately, is you need to do the human side, people, process, technology, all the way back to those publicly available sources. We need to start putting risk scores to the data all the way back. And that's just data ops. But embedding data ops with decision support so that executives know, okay, we're going to impose this new measure. What informed that? And you need to be able to drive that risk discussion all the way back to the source of the data. What this can do ultimately is create a data quality flywheel, right? Like a good to great scenario where we can really ask questions of enterprise data and publicly available data at the same level. And that hasn't happened, right? Because you can't trust publicly available data the way you trust enterprise data mostly. But what public data has available to it, think of Wikipedia, is it has sort of the competitive process that's drilling on it. Hey, is this valid? Can I trust it? And that sort of market component adds an element of fidelity to public data that wouldn't be bad to be applied on enterprise data. So that's a whole way of thinking. Tom Davenport and others that have been thinking about competing on analytics for years are much better positioned than me to speak to that. But I think people, process, technology, experience in data ops, and then pushing risk modeling all the way back to the sources of publicly available data is vital to answering that question. And then ultimately the good news story is innovation systems should police themselves, and then you don't have to choose between research, security, and open collaboration. There's a tension there, and that's what we want moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
This was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I've never thought about these problems before.
Okay.
Because again, I've been in the other side, in the corporate world, not on the federal side. I was working for Rockwell Automation for about 4 years. And we have this fake product issue, right?
Yeah.
You even do you do serialization, but there's still about a 5% revenue leak because of fake products, right? In different countries, they just brand your product, things like that, and then that leads to millions of dollars spending for transformation initiatives to do serialization. So has Qlik used some of those concepts for like a manufacturing industry and to talk about intellectual property, right?
That's a great question. So because I spend my time in federal, I can only speak a little bit to what I know, but we do borrow from those use cases because like manufacturing especially has a lot of input on how downstream federal agencies do this. There are other data sets. I've seen some that, for example, Homeland Security has invested in for essentially evaluating all the steps that a product took to get to wherever it is in the manufacturing supply chain, and was it manufactured. There's certain data, atmospheric data that can be gathered. So if you have the right data sources about where things like fake products might have started, again, that's a data quality issue. You just sort of continue to push the data ops question further back until you get to where those products might have originated. And that's why it's important to have investigators in your team, because digital forensics people or actual special agents from law enforcement agencies know how to find that 5% and make it 4 and 3 and 2. And I think that's a human discipline where it's part of my first recommendation, invest in due diligence. For the higher end threats like that, where it's actually eroding revenue, well, it's your trade-off. Lose the revenue or invest in the due diligence. And that's where I would have the conversation with the board or whomever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the session. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Great session.